Lancashire's still under lockdown at the time of this recording, which means that we can't go out and interact with the real world just yet.
However, Michelle was passing St Peter's in Heysham the other day, so she's secured us some footage.
Even though we're restricted to our individual pits, we thought we'd produce a narrative to go along with it.
A mini-sode of Lancashire Footnotes, if you will.
So, nobody appears to know exactly how old St Peter's is. The literature about it varies considerably according to each individual author's idea of the chronology of British history, or how much research they could be bothered conducting.
It's bloody old though.
Some sources cite it as being Celtic.
Others, Norse.
Others still, Saxon. Twice.
It's just a bit odd.
Regardless of its exact origins, the humped-backed church and its lichen-encrusted graveyard, along with the ruins of St Patrick's Chapel close by, teeter on the cliff's edge above the Irish Sea, turgid with historical tidbits, some more believable than others.
For example, folklore claims that St Patrick beached here, having crossed the Irish Sea on a millstone.
A clever trick if you can pull it off, but a bit stupid perhaps considering the availability of clinker-built boats at the time.
Patrick died in 490 AD.
Apparently.
And was buried,
Also apparently, in the first of Heysham's rock-hewn graves. That's according to local folklore. We're not about to try to substantiate it.
buried is probably not the right word.
Forced into a stone hollow by a barge pole with a foot on his neck might be a more fitting description, unless he was extremely small and had a detachable head.
What became of his anti-grav millstone? History doesn't record.
The rock graves, incidentally, appear on the album cover of Black Sabbath's Greatest Hits. Not a lot of people probably know that. Then there's the Druid Stone, found alongside a collection of skeletons and more than 1,200 artefacts dating back over 12,000 years in the Barrows.
Was this carved lump of rock with its rectangular slot the base of a 5th century cross?
Or possibly a medieval plague stone?
Or even a prehistoric bird bath?
Why are we asking you? You're probably as much in the dark as the rest of us.
We ought to mention the hog back around this juncture.
Purportedly unearthed from the graveyard, along with a skeleton and a spear, between 1807 and 1811.
Although it might have been earlier.
Or possibly later.
It might have been found near the ruins of St Patrick's.
Or possibly down by the church itself.
Nobody seems to know.
Whoever kept the church records back in Georgian times should have been sacked.
Nobody's entirely sure what's actually depicted on the hog back either.
It might be a hunting party, or Ragnarok from Norse mythology, with Thor battling the world serpent.
Who knew they had Marvel comics back then?
One thing the carving does show that's instantly recognisable is a shingle roof. Not the usual straightforward roof, but a curved roof, resembling the upturned keel of a boat.
Which is just what you'd find to expect on a 5th century keel.
The name given to the upturned boats that early missionaries converted into makeshift chapels.
Nobody else seems to have noticed this.
That's because we're more observant and clever than most historians.
With such great antiquity, naturally, you'd expect a sizable smattering of ghosts at St Peter's.
And you'd be wrong. As far as we can work out, there aren't any.
There have been some UFO sightings, however.
Which is forteana enough for us to include them in this film. In 1999, 4 bright green lights, moving erratically and at various speeds, were spotted messing about above Heysham.
Nothing to do with the infamous nuclear reactor around the corner, obviously.
Between February the 7th and March the 8th that same year, a number of other unusual incidents took place around Morecambe Bay, including
3 triangles being witnessed in the sky.
An orange ball that appeared to be on fire.
An unconventional silent craft consisting of 4 red lights.
And 5 orange flying saucers aimlessly milling about over Fleetwood. Don't ask me. I haven't got a clue.
You can't help wondering whether British aerospace were up to something covert or not.
Back to St. Peter's, where, during alterations some while ago, a stone coffin was discovered beneath the chancel's south window, containing human remains and a few bits of knackered old chalice.
Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade springs to mind.
The coffin was dragged into the churchyard, where it remains to this day, resembling a horse trough, abandoned to the ravages of Lancashire's coastal storms.
This happens a lot.
Despite the church and the grounds being owned by the National Trust, the base of a 2,000-year-old beehive quern left next to the church wall wasn't broken in half the last time we looked. It is now.
Normally such items would be in museums.
Wrapped up in tissue paper, handled by serious people in ponytails wearing white gloves and spectacles, rather than left to the sport of bored local kids.
But that's typical of Lancashire's history. Nobody apparently cares, which is why we can guarantee this video will get less than 100 views.
We could talk about the Viking woman with her carved bone comb and her white shroud, who was dug up in the churchyard.
We could talk about the buried stone carving of a bird's head, thought to date from the 7th century.
We could talk about St. Patrick's Well on the corner of Main Street, built into the wall of the rectory garden.
Or the Saxon doorway from the north wall of the church that was taken down in 1864 and rebuilt as a folly on the other side of the churchyard.
Or the ancient stone axes and hammers found in the barrows. Or the
mystical labyrinth carved into a cliff.
We could talk about those things, but we've run out of footage. We're not even sure if Michelle was breaking any plague laws or not. It's all very confusing nowadays.
One last item worth a quick mention, however, is the following epitaph on the gravestone for Sarah Hannah Jones, which reads,
Poet, philosopher, and failure. We know how she feels.
So, if you care about Lancashire
and or our mental well-being,
please click subscribe.
And all being well, we'll see you in our next Lancashire Footnote.